conversation, rather, yeah, we could say conversation on making sure that those who are voting, and we hope everybody's registered to vote, but we want to make sure that people don't vote in the dark, that they are informed and educated about the issues that matter to us in our community, not just what's happening at the top of the ticket, but everything up and down the ticket. And so I do want to acknowledge our partners tonight. I want to thank Performing Stars and Felicia Gaston and their social justice team for really steering this conversation tonight, and certainly, come on, let's give it up for Felicia. And then we want to thank the League of Women Voters. Thank you all tonight for being here. And so I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to decrease, and someone else is going to increase. And so tonight we have Lynn Dooley, who is one of the leaders of the League of Women Voters of Marin and Sonoma County. She will come and share information that we need to know, and following that, we will hear from Lisa Bennett. And so they'll come in that order. And again, thank you for being here. And if you are on social media, you can go to our Facebook page and you can share this very important conversation with all your Facebook friends. All right? Thank you so much. Come on up.
Thank you so much, Reverend. I appreciate it. So, I have some notes here. Cheat sheets. I'm Lynn Dooley. Thank you so much, Reverend. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Felicity and, Felicia. Where's Felicia? Felicia, sorry, I didn't mean to not pronounce your name properly. And all of the amazing work that you're doing to help us get out the vote for this year. I appreciate it very much. I wanted to introduce the people that are working with us at the League of Women Voters. You all know Pat Becker. She is a wonderful volunteer for our league. Carol Joy Harris is joining me to give us some information and some updates. As we've mentioned, we are with the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political grassroots organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of the voting process and defend democracy. The League is nonpartisan, never supporting or opposing any political party or candidate. However, the League does advocate for or against policies in the public interest by establishing League positions. Positions are taken after rigorous study and member agreement. Endorsements of state, regional, or local measures fall under this role. Look at my hands shaking. That's because it's heavy and yeah. This presentation today falls under the other branch of our purview, and that is the voter education branch. We are a group of volunteers, 40 of whom researched and wrote in-depth look at the 10 state ballot propositions for your review today. Unbiased and nonpartisan scripts that we then recorded, and we will play these recordings for you today. So this is a video and an in-person presentation. After each recording, we'll stop and take your questions on each of the propositions, and then we'll move on to the next recording. The fiscal information came from the State Legislative Analyst's Office, which acts as the legislature's nonpartisan fiscal and policy advisor. The campaign financing came from the Secretary of State's Campaign Finance Filing and Disclosure Statement. The campaign financing in the videos is from August 21st because we made them last week. We'll update that information for you after each proposition recording. Carol Joy will take that role. Political science students from Sonoma State University are helping us update the financial information on a weekly basis. Everyone you see here in these videos are League volunteers. We are not professionals, and we are not using professional equipment. So please be kind. So, Ja'Cory, if you would please run Proposition 2.
Hi, I'm Becky Bingay,
And I'm Carol Joy Harris.
and this is California State Proposition 2. You will see it on your ballot as authorizes bonds for public school and community college facilities. It is a legislative statute. Carol Joy, what is the question raised by Prop 2?
The question is, should the state authorize $10 billion in general obligation bonds for repair, upgrade, and construction of facilities at K-12 public schools, including charter schools and community colleges?
Now, what is the current situation? How many schools and colleges are there in California?
Currently, there are about 10,000 K-12 public schools statewide, including about 1,300 charter schools and 115 local community colleges that offer associate degrees and other programs for adults.
Is there information on the current state of California public schools?
Yes, according to a 2020 publication from the Public Policy Institute of California, 38% of California students attend schools that don't meet minimum facility standards, and 15% of students attend schools with extreme deficiencies such as gas leaks, power failures, and structural damage.
Who pays for facility costs related to these schools and colleges?
The state and the school districts usually share the cost for renovation and new construction almost equally. The state uses voter-approved bonds for its share of these costs. Both school districts and community college districts are expected to pay the remaining project costs using local funds.
And what does Proposition 2 propose?
Well, Prop 2 authorizes $10 billion in state general obligation bonds for repair, upgrade, and construction of education facilities.
And how would that be distributed?
$8.5 billion of that would be allocated for renovations, repairs, and construction of K-12 schools, and $1.5 billion would be allocated for community college improvements. Of that money, Prop 2 allows up to $115 million to be used for reducing lead levels in water at public school sites.
How would the funds be awarded?
K-12 funds would be awarded after a competitive application process on a first-come, first-served basis. Extra funding can be allocated to build a new classroom or to renovate an existing classroom to be used for transitional kindergarten. This extra funding would also cover projects supporting low-income students, English learners, or foster youth.
Does Prop 2 cover all these costs?
No, districts would need to raise their own local bonds and apply to the state facilities program for a matching grant to receive funding.
How are these funds awarded to community colleges?
Colleges would submit a plan listing their statewide project priorities. The governor and the legislature would then select specific projects to fund.
And is there oversight on community college funding?
Oh, yes. The districts would be required to complete certain tasks to help ensure that the bond funds are spent as intended.
What is the fiscal impact of Proposition 2?
There would be increased state costs of about $500 million annually for 35 years to repay the bond. Payments would be made from the state general fund. This would be less than 0.5% of the state's total general fund budget.
So what do supporters say about Prop 2?
Supporters say any school bond placed on the ballot is not going to cover the enormous needs of K-12 schools and community colleges, but this money would help address the most urgent needs. They say that the funds to make the basic structural repairs needed at every school are lacking. Students need safe spaces to learn in order to reach their full potential. Supporters also say that Prop 2 would increase access to quality, affordable higher education for all Californians, including returning veterans. It would allow more students to start their college education and transfer to a four-year university without crushing debt.
And what do opponents say?
Opponents say bonds are borrowed money that must be paid back, plus interest, even if that means cutting vital programs to do it. They say that children in school today would be drowning in new debt for decades if Prop 2 passes. Opponents also say that it's reckless to borrow billions more to pay for more school buildings when district enrollment is declining in both K-12 public schools and community colleges.
Now, Carol Joy, can you tell us about campaign financing?
Sure, Becky. Through August 21st, a total of $1.8 million has been contributed in support of Prop 2. You can see the top contributors there on your screen. And in opposition, no contributions have been filed to date.
In conclusion, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
Okay, a yes vote supports issuing the $10 billion in bonds for repair, upgrade, and construction of public education facilities. And a no vote opposes issuing this $10 billion in bonds.
Thanks, Carol Joy.
You're welcome, Becky.
Really familiar to me. So we have new information about the campaign financing, and this is as of September 16th. This is from the California Secretary of State's Cal Access Campaign Filing System. In support of Proposition 2, an additional $1.2 million has been contributed for a total of $3 million. The top contributors are the California Teachers Association at $1.5 million, the California Building Industry Association for $1 million, and the Coalition for Adequate School Housing Issues Committee at $1 million. You may notice this adds up to more than the total of $3 million. That's because often contributions are made and not allocated to the proposition until closer to the election, depending on expenditure need. So that's why that is like that. And as far as contributions in opposition, there still have been no contributions there.
Does anybody have any questions on Proposition 2? Yes, there's a microphone coming over.
So we have a bond measure coming up for Tam High School District, so Redwood, Tam, and Drake. And so, you know, to me, that's a little confusing because they're wanting money for the same thing. And how does that impact that bond measure? Do you know?
Yeah, the only thing that I would know about that is that they would not replace each other. They would be mutually exclusive. So if you pass the bond for TAM and its surrounding areas, it would not replace any of the money that this area would receive from this bond if it also passes. That I do know. Anybody else have questions? Yes.
So how long does it take from the time the bond passes for the schools or whatever to receive the money?
That's a really great question. That depends on how the state decides to sell the bonds. Sometimes the state sells the bonds right away, and sometimes it waits to sell the bonds. So I'm not sure the exact turnaround time for the schools to actually receive the money, but I do know that there are often times when bonds have been approved and the money has not been allocated because there's other bonds that need to be paid for and sold and repaid before then. So I will look that up. I'll find out for you.
And who buys the bonds? Do we buy the bonds? Who buys the bonds?
So the bonds, this is a good question too, and I have to think about this. The bonds are sold by the state to the public. So when you invest in, it's like investing in the stock market, you would invest in bonds. So the bonds then are bought by the public, and the public then provides the state with the money that's coming in. But in the meantime, while the bonds are still being called in, the general fund pays the bonds back, or property taxes pay the bonds back. So ultimately, it comes from the investor, us, but it works with the state at the same time.
Is there some email sent out that says these bonds are ready to be bought, or how do you know?
I'm not sure about that. That's another good question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else? And again, let me just say, yes, there's another microphone coming over.
Did you say that our property taxes pay for those bonds?
Not these bonds, but some bonds are paid for by property taxes. There's one coming up that we will talk about that does pay for with property tax money.
Okay, so this one's not a property tax or is it
No,
sales
this
tax bond
This
item?
one's the general fund bond.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So I just want to say that I'm not an expert on this, but I have been researching this with all these people for months now. As soon as we knew about it, we started researching them. If I don't know the answer to the question, I will certainly write down the question and get back to you with the answers. I'll send the answers to the organization and they can distribute them. So please continue to ask questions.
Question, are these bonds, are the earnings on these bonds subject to state income tax?
I don't know. That's another good question. I don't know. I'm sorry. But I'm going to write down all these questions. So let's move on while we can to Proposition 3.
Hi, I'm Becky Bingay.
And I'm Carol Joy.
Hi, I'm Suki Rob Wilder,
And I'm Carol Joy Harris.
and this is Proposition 3. You'll see it on your ballot as a constitutional right to marriage. It's a legislative constitutional amendment. Carol Joy, what question does Prop 3 pose?
Proposition 3 poses the question, shall California's Constitution be amended to recognize that marriage is a fundamental right regardless of sex or race, and remove language stating that marriage is only between a man and a woman?
And what's the background to Proposition 3?
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2015 that all state laws that ban or do not recognize marriages on the basis of race or sex are unconstitutional. This ruling is based on the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. California already complies with this ruling, but the California Constitution still contains language that says marriage is between a man and a woman.
So what does Prop 3 propose?
Prop 3 proposes amending the California Constitution to recognize marriage as a fundamental right and to remove language that conflicts with federal rulings.
And what are the fiscal effects of this change?
Prop 3 would not change who is allowed to marry in California, so this means there would be no change in revenues or costs for state and local governments.
So what do supporters say about Prop 3?
Supporters say Proposition 3 protects every Californian's right to marry, regardless of gender or race. And they also say Prop 3 updates our state constitution to match what the federal courts have said about who can marry, reflecting current court decisions and our values as Californians. They also say Prop 3 is supported by a broad and bipartisan coalition of civic and faith leaders, as well as civil rights leaders.
And opponents? What do they say?
Opponents say Proposition 3 removes important protections for marriage while pretending to expand rights. They say a fundamental right to marry means it would remove protections against child marriages, incest, and polygamy. They also say same-sex marriage has been legal across the country since 2015, so Prop 3 is fixing a problem that doesn't exist.
And what about campaign financing for Prop 3? Can you tell us about that?
Sure. The $2.3 million has been contributed in support, and no dollars have been contributed in opposition. See the top contributors on the screen there.
So, can you tell us what a yes vote and a no vote mean?
Sure. A yes vote means the California Constitution would be amended to recognize marriage as a fundamental right, regardless of sex or race, and remove language stating that marriage is only between a man and a woman. And a no vote means the California Constitution would not be amended.
Thank you, Carol Joy.
My pleasure,
dollars,
Suki.
which is up $600,000 from when this video was made. And there are no changes to the top contributors. And there still have been no contributions in opposition.
Okay, so questions on Prop 3? Okay, thank you. Then, Jacori, could we do Prop 4?
Hi, I'm Joan Wrench, And I'm Gail Peterson.
And this is California State Proposition 4. You'll see it on your ballot as authorizes bonds for safe drinking water, wildfire prevention, and protecting communities and natural lands from climate risks. It is a legislative statute. Gail, can you please tell us what question Prop 4 raises?
Sure, Joan. Proposition 4 poses the question, should California borrow $10 billion in bonds to fund environmental infrastructure projects aimed at conserving natural resources, as well as responding to the causes and effects of climate change?
And what's the current situation around these issues?
Currently, the state pays for many activities aimed at conserving natural resources, as well as responding to the causes and effects of climate change. Over the last 10 years, the state of California has paid out about $13 billion annually on natural resources and climate-related disasters, with about 15% of this coming from bonds. There are a few billion dollars remaining from prior climate bonds that have not as yet been committed to specific activities.
What are some of the current areas of climate focus?
Areas of climate focus currently include increasing available water, conserving fish and forests, improving state and local parks, wildfire protection, mitigating sea level rise, among many others.
And how are these activities funded now?
Funds come from local, state, and federal sources. The state can pay for these activities upfront or by using bonds. Local governments also pay for water, energy infrastructure, and local parks. And the federal government contributes funds to things like improving local drinking water systems and building energy infrastructure.
What does Prop 4 propose?
Prop 4 allows the state to sell a $10 billion bond to protect natural resources and for climate activities.
And who would receive these funds?
Money would be offered as loans and grants to local governments, Native American tribes, nonprofit organizations, and businesses. Money would also be made available for state agencies to spend on state-run activities.
So, Gail, how would these funds be distributed?
Well, 38% of the funds would go for safe drinking water, groundwater storage, wastewater recycling, and flood control. 15% would go for forest health and wildfire prevention. 12% would go for sea level rise in coastal areas. 12% would go for land conservation and habitat restoration. 8.5% for energy infrastructure and renewable sources of energy. 7% to expand, renovate, and repair state parks. 4.5% for protecting communities from extreme heat, and 3% for farms and agriculture to improve soil health, reduce air pollution, and use less water.
Does Prop 4 have any other requirements?
Yes, it requires that 40% of funds be used to directly benefit communities that have lower incomes or are more vulnerable to impacts of climate change. It also requires regular public reporting on how the bond money is spent.
So, what would the fiscal impact be?
It would increase state costs by about $400 million annually over 40 years to repay the bond. This amount is about 0.5% to 1% of the general fund revenue fund per year.
And what do supporters say?
Supporters say given the threat the state faces from wildfires, water pollution, and extreme heat, the need for more spending on these issues is urgent. Communities need to adapt to climate change and reduce our climate pollution right now. This is not a problem that can wait until it's convenient to fund in the budget. And they say wildfire smoke caused more than 50,000 premature deaths and more than $400 billion in economic harm in just one decade. And nearly 1 million Californians lack access to safe drinking water.
And what are opponents saying?
Opponents are saying the cost of interest on this bond is too high. These projects should be funded without taking on debt. The funds voted on will be paid for by future generations who do not have the opportunity to vote for the measure, and they say the measure should be separated out for funding initiatives and distribution.
What does campaign financing look like?
$170,000 has been raised in support. You can see the top contributors on your screen. And $0 have been contributed in opposition.
So, Gail, in summary, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote approves the state sale of $10 billion in bonds to fund various activities aimed at conserving natural resources and responding to the causes and effects of climate change. And a no vote means the state would not borrow $10 billion in bonds.
Thank you, Gail. That was helpful.
Thanks, Joan. You're welcome.
Contributions in support of Prop 4 are $690,000. Save the Redwoods contribution is now $225,000. The Sempervirens Fund Forest Sustainer has contributed $100,000, and the California State Parks Foundation has contributed $75,000. And there are still no contributions in opposition.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so questions for Prop 4? Yes.
Thank you. $10 billion is a lot of money. It's a great cause. The great organizations are supporting it. Where else could you possibly get that kind of money? There is nowhere else, is there?
Yeah, I can't imagine anywhere else that they're going to come up with that kind of money. And I think that one of the things that has happened is that the state has had to come up with this kind of money because of all the disasters. So they're trying to do a little bit of forward thinking this time.
And they're borrowing this money from banks, just regular financial institutions? Is that where it comes from?
No, they sell these as bonds the same way they would sell the bonds in Proposition 2. And there's a really good explanation about bonds in your voter information guide. So if you have registered to vote, you should have gotten one of these in the mail or via email. But on page 64, there's a great explanation of what all the bonds are that are currently out there and how the state is paying for them and what percentage of the general fund they represent. So this is the same thing. These are sold to the public and then paid back from the general fund.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Hi, I used to be a wildland firefighter, so I have some knowledge of this, and I will say that since the 1980s, when I was actively fighting fires, and the 90s, every year there's been a budget for all these things about preventing wildfires, getting rid of the fuel loading, and every single year in the state of California, that money has been diverted to other projects and other things, so that right now, for example, 2 weeks ago we went to the Mount St. Helena, the state park up there, and it was an incredible mess of fuels. It was a tinderbox, grass over the tabletops of dry grass. It was horrible. And so for me, in my experience, what is to prevent them from diverting all this money into somebody's pockets that has nothing to do with cleaning up the forests as it has been done for the past 50 years?
Yeah, that's also a great question. There are very many circumstances when funds that have been earmarked for one cause go to another cause. Some of these propositions that you see this time have built-in provisions that say that cannot happen. This is not one of them. So I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that there is an answer to that question because there is a big deficit in the state of California, in the budget deficit in the state of California. So, but I'll look it up and see if I can come up with any other good answers to that. Anybody else? Yes.
Did it say that this bond was coming up because there was a previous bond that had expired? Or did I hear that correctly?
There have been bonds in the past that have funded some of this. It said about 15% of the money that's been allocated have come from bonds. but this is not replacing a bond, it is just in addition to it's additional money.
Gotcha. And just to your question about money and diverting, and where we live, they're been doing fire mitigation, and what I learned today, it's at the end of a 4-year cycle that Marin has been using a lot of this fund. So somewhere along the way, that money has come down to at least some part of our local community, because in our, like I said, in our neighborhood, in the last 2 weeks, I don't know how many square miles they've cleared, but it's been pretty remarkable.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to Proposition 5.
Hi, I'm Barbara Strong, and this is Bob Pendole, and this is California State Proposition 5. You'll see it on your ballot as allows local bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure with 55% voter approval. It is a legislative constitutional amendment. What question does Proposition 5 raise, Bob?
Well, Barbara, the question is, should the vote requirement for local governments to issue bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure projects be lowered from 2/3 to 55%?
How do local governments currently fund affordable housing and public infrastructure projects?
They typically issue general obligation bonds to pay for housing assistance programs and public infrastructure projects such as roads, hospitals, fire stations, water treatment facilities, and libraries.
What are general obligation bonds?
General obligation bonds allow local governments to borrow money and repay it with interest over time. These bonds must be approved by voters and are paid for by increased property taxes. Proposition 13 amended the state constitution to limit property taxes to 1% of assessed value, with certain exceptions, including bonds issued by school districts for construction or repair.
How are these bonds currently approved?
Well, before cities, towns, counties, and special districts can issue bonds to pay for affordable housing or public infrastructure projects, they must be approved by a 2/3 supermajority of voters. School district bonds, which require 55%, are the only exception.
What does Proposition 5 propose?
Prop 5 would amend the California Constitution to lower the vote requirement from 2/3 to 55% to approve general obligation bonds. These bonds would fund local housing assistance programs, including affordable housing construction and a wide variety of public infrastructure projects. It would allow local governments to assess property taxes above 1% to repay these bonds, adding this exception to the Prop 13 limit.
How is affordable housing defined?
Prop 5 defines affordable housing as developments that are affordable to households earning up to 150% of a county's median household income.
Will there be oversight?
Yes, the local jurisdiction would be required to conduct an annual audit to ensure that the funds are being spent as intended. The audits would be released to the public and submitted to the California State Auditor.
What would the fiscal impact be?
A lower voter approval requirement would likely result in more local general obligation bonds passing. This would increase the funding available for housing assistance and public infrastructure. The amount of increase would depend on decisions by local governments and the voters, and the cost would be paid for with higher property taxes.
What do supporters say about Proposition 5?
Supporters say California has a deficit of 2.5 million homes. Prop 5 can make California more affordable and ease this severe housing crisis. They say this is a public safety issue. Public safety specific bond measures have been supported by more than 55% of the voters, but they failed because they did not attain the 2/3 approval. They also say lowering the vote threshold to 55% creates parity with school districts and cities, counties, and special districts. School districts won voter approval for lower thresholds 2 decades ago.
And what do opponents say?
Opponents say Prop 5 undermines Proposition 13's check on local government's taxing authority and erodes property tax safeguards. They say Prop 5 opens the door for massive new tax hikes for property owners and increased rents for residential and commercial tenants. And they say the proposition language on public infrastructure is so vague that virtually anything can qualify.
Can you tell us about campaign financing, please?
Sure. 2.5 million has been contributed in support and 28.5 million has been donated in opposition. You can see the top contributors on your screen.
In closing, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote means that the vote threshold to pass local bond measures for housing assistance and public infrastructure would be lowered to 55%. And a no vote means that the vote threshold would remain at 2/3.
Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome, Barbara.
Okay, so there have been no additional contributions in support of or opposition to Prop 5.
So questions about Prop 5. This is one that does deal with property taxes, as you mentioned earlier.
You know, all these bonds, are they sure they're going to get the money? It's like I'm bankrupt already because I agree with them all so far.
So what was the question? I'm sorry.
How can they be sure they're going to raise the money because everybody wants bonds?
Yeah, so that's a good question, but at the same time, bonds have been a staple in California for a very long time. And again, I want to recommend that you look in this booklet. Can you hold that for a second? On page 64, the description is very interesting about how California deals with bonds. Because it says that the state currently is repaying about $80 billion in bonds. In addition, the voters have, and the legislator previously have approved about $35 billion in bonds. Most of these bonds are expected to be sold in the next several years. So the state is expecting to pay about $6 billion each year from the general fund to repay these bonds. So they break it up over time. That's how it works. The state will continue to pay a similar amount over the next few years. This is about 3% of the state's annual general fund revenue, which is lower than the historic average of about 4%. So this is, even though these are huge amounts of money, it is interesting. It says if both Prop 2 and Prop 4 pass, this would total about the cost to repay both bonds would total about $900 million each year, which is about 1/2 of 1% of the state's annual general fund budget. So to answer your question, they've done this before and it works. Yes?
So this one talked, though, about getting repaid through property taxes, which are different than general obligation bonds, correct? Is it completely repaid through property taxes?
Yes, because these are specifically for low income or infrastructure bonds. So if you have a bond that has a specific need and it's assigned and it is dealing with these two things, then it comes from property taxes. School bonds are the same way. School bonds come from property taxes.
So they don't increase the state
right. But the
budget,
state general fund is created by, income tax and property tax and, all these incomes that come from sales tax, they all go into this big general fund budget. But property tax is where this one would be earmarked to come from. And if it's needed, then this threshold change would allow the state to assess the money from property taxes at higher than the 1% that the Proposition 13 has already passed. I know it's confusing. It's very confusing. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
So it will raise property taxes if it passes?
Not necessarily. They have the opportunity, if they need it, to raise property taxes, but it says that's a contingency. Just like school bonds have the opportunity to raise property taxes, but they may or may not do that. Certain cities have already raised property taxes, like LA's property tax is 1.5%. So there are cities that have already made arrangements to raise property taxes some. But this does not guarantee that property taxes will be raised. This just says that if more bonds are approved for low-income housing and for infrastructure projects, they could impact property taxes. Okay? All right. righty. So now we're on to 6.
Percent. And a no vote means that the vote threshold would remain at 2/3.
Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome, Barbara.
Proposition 6. You'll see it on your ballot as eliminates constitutional provision allowing involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons. It is a legislative constitutional amendment. So, Caroline, can you tell us what question Proposition 6 poses?
Sure. Prop 6 poses the question, should California amend the state constitution to prohibit involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime and to no longer authorize the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to discipline any incarcerated person for refusing a work assignment?
And what is Prop 6's background?
California's Constitution mirrors the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which bans slavery and involuntary servitude except for as punishment for a convicted crime.
What's the current state of involuntary servitude in California prisons?
In California, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is currently able to require able-bodied incarcerated people to work. Time credits can be earned for good conduct and for educational or rehabilitative program completion. Those that refuse work assignments can be punished with the loss of privileges.
How many people in California are incarcerated in prisons?
As of May 2024, the population of incarcerated individuals in California is approximately 92,000 people.
Do all incarcerated people in California have work assignments?
No, about 1/3 of incarcerated people in California work at assignments. Some support running the prison facilities, including food service, groundwork, building maintenance, and office administration, and some support the community, like firefighting.
And do they get paid?
California's minimum wage is $16 per hour, and state law permits the Corrections Department to pay up to half of that minimum wage, or $8 per hour. The current average hourly wage is 74 cents per hour.
What does Proposition 6 propose?
Proposition 6 would end the practice imposing mandatory work requirements for incarcerated persons in jails and prisons. Instead, jobs would be voluntary. It would also protect the incarcerated from being disciplined for refusing a work assignment.
Would time credits still be offered?
Yes, time credits would continue to be offered to reduce sentences in exchange for incarcerated persons voluntarily accepting work assignments.
What are the fiscal effects?
State and local criminal justice costs depend on how the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation incentivizes the voluntary work assignments. Costs would increase if wages are increased. Costs would decrease if time credits are increased because people would serve less time. Either way, costs likely would not exceed tens of millions of dollars annually. This amount is less than 0.5% of the state's total general fund budget.
What do supporters say?
Supporters say involuntary servitude is an extension of slavery. Slavery is inconsistent with our values and should be stricken from the California Constitution. They say California is one of just 16 states that still allows involuntary servitude for incarcerated people. They also say Proposition 6 ends slavery in California and upholds human rights and dignity for the incarcerated. Rather than normalizing exploitation, we can prioritize rehabilitation and prepare people in custody to successfully return to their communities.
And opponents, what do they say?
Opponents say if Proposition 6 passes, it could cost the taxpayers more if wages for inmates are set higher. By allowing incarcerated people to refuse work assignments, the management of prisons could become more difficult. And they say this is a reparations effort. The state should instead be focused on the budget deficit.
Would you please tell us about campaign financing?
Sure, $93,000 have been contributed in support of the proposition as of September 3rd, 2024. And as of yet, no contributions have been recorded in opposition. See the top contributors on your screen.
So in conclusion, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote supports amending the state constitution to prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime, and incarcerated people cannot be disciplined for refusing a work assignment. A no vote opposes amending the state constitution to prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
$1,000. Patty Quinlan, philanthropist, $250,000. And the California African American PAC for $80,000. And there are still no dollars contributed in opposition.
Thank you. Questions on Prop 6? Okay. So we're going to move on to 32 because these next group, another 5, your patience is very much appreciated, are based on signatures. They've been put on the ballot by signatures. So Prop 32 is the first of this lot. So, Jacori, if you will.
Hi, I'm Karen Weeks.
Hi, I'm Sarah Thorpe.
And this is California State Proposition 32. You'll see it on your ballot as raises minimum wage. It is an initiative statute. So Sarah, what does Proposition 32 pose to California voters?
Prop 32 poses the question, should California raise the state minimum wage for all employers to $18 per hour by 2026 and thereafter adjust the rate annually based on inflation?
What's the current situation, Sarah?
Since January 2024, the California state minimum wage is $16 per hour for all businesses except fast food restaurants, which is $20 per hour. State law can set higher minimum wages for employers in some industries. For instance, healthcare has specific laws regarding minimum wage increases depending on the size of the employer, the type of facility, etc.
What does Prop 32 propose?
In 2025, this proposition would increase the minimum wage from $16 per hour to $18 per hour for employers with 26 or more employees. Employers with 25 or fewer employees would have to pay a minimum wage of $17 per hour. Then, in 2026, the minimum wage would be $18 per hour for all employees.
And will there be any further adjustments?
Yes, starting in 2027, minimum wage will be adjusted annually based on inflation. The state's adjustments would mirror the U.S. inflation rate, but will never be less than 0 or more than 3.5% per year.
And what would the fiscal impact be of these changes?
That would depend. Higher minimum wages tend to push up wages for other workers. Businesses paying higher wages would likely pass increases along to customers, and higher wages could reduce some business profits. On the other hand, with increased incomes, there could be fewer people enrolled in programs like Medi-Cal, which could lower state and local government costs. The change of revenue could reduce the state's general fund, but likely that change would be less than 0.5% to 1%, 0.5%.
And what do supporters say about Prop 32?
Supporters say every Californian who works a full 40-hour week should be able to afford life's basic needs. People need to be able to afford rent and feed their families. They say increased income boosts the economies of local communities and creates more jobs in the communities. And taxpayers should not subsidize corporations that choose to pay low wages, enabling those corporations to keep profits for their owners.
And now what do opponents say?
Opponents say Prop 32 forces small businesses to increase prices, adding to inflation and raising the cost of living in California even more. They say Prop 32 costs jobs with the greatest impact on teens and people of color in entry-level jobs. And they say the market, not politicians and bureaucrats, ought to dictate the financial growth and success of working men and women in California.
What does the campaign financing look like for this proposition?
$11.5 million has been contributed in support of Prop 32, and $55,000 has been contributed in opposition. You can see the top contributors on the screen.
So in summary, what does a yes vote mean and a no vote mean?
A yes vote approves increasing the state minimum wage to $18 per hour by 2026. Thereafter, the rate adjusts annually based on inflation. A no vote means the state minimum wage remains at $16 per hour.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
You're welcome, Karen.
This recording, no additional dollars have been contributed in support, and in opposition, $10,000 has been contributed in opposition. So the top donors remain the same.
Okay, any questions on minimum wage? It's pretty straightforward. Oh, okay.
Do you know where California ranks on minimum wage right now in terms of versus other states?
I do know that the federal minimum wage is $7.25, and there are quite a few, at least 13 states that wage is the minimum wage. I don't know about other states other than California, but I do know that there are various minimum wages amongst the counties, that different counties can set other minimum wages. So this minimum wage would be for any worker that is using the state minimum wage. But I'll find out. I'll let you know. Anybody else? No? Okay. So 33.
Hi, I'm Mary Topliff.
And I'm Regina Bianucci-Russ.
And this is California State Proposition 33. You'll see it on your ballot as it expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. It is an initiative statute. Hi, Regina. What question does Prop 33 pose?
Prop 33 asks the question, should the state law that limits rent control for certain types of property be repealed? And should the state limit the initial rent for first-time tenants in all types of housing?
What's the current law behind Prop 33? And what's the situation?
Rental housing is expensive in California because there's not enough housing for everyone who wants to live here. About 1/4 of Californians live in communities with local rent control. In 1995, the state passed the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. This act limited local rent control laws from applying to single-family homes, condominiums, and housing occupied after February 1st, 1995. Rent control currently only limits rent increases on existing tenants, thereby allowing landlords to reset the rent for a new tenant.
What does Prop 33 propose?
Prop 33 would repeal the 1995 Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which prohibits laws imposing rent control on certain housing. Repealing this act would allow local rent control laws to apply to any housing.
Are there any other impacts of Prop 33?
Yes, the proposition would allow cities and counties to limit the initial rental rates that landlords may charge new tenants in all types of housing.
So are existing rental control laws changed?
No, the proposition itself does not make any changes to existing local rent control laws. Generally, cities and counties would have to take separate actions to change their local laws. The state would be prohibited from taking future laws to limit local rent control.
What would the fiscal impact be?
The fiscal effects would depend on how many properties end up being covered by local rent control and how much rents are limited. These things would be decided by future actions of local governments and voters. If local rent control laws expand, local governments could have increased costs to carry out these laws. These costs could range from a few $1 million to tens of millions of dollars annually. These costs likely would be paid for by fees on landlords.
And what are some of the situations that would impact these fiscal effects?
Well, some renters could move less often. Some renters who live in properties covered by rent control could spend less on rent in the future. Some renters who live in properties not covered by rent control could spend more on rent. Landlords could sell their properties to new owners who would live there instead of renting it out, resulting in fewer homes available to rent. And property tax revenues for cities, counties, special districts, and schools could decline because landlords might not want to pay as much for these properties, devaluing rental housing, thus reducing the amount of property taxes paid by landlords.
So what do the supporters say?
Supporters say that the affordable housing crisis is destroying the California dream. Nearly 1 million people have left California in the last 5 years. This crisis will only get worse as young, talented people leave and the needy remain. They say that even if you're not a renter, your quality of life and the value of your property are still harmed by the housing crisis. And every city should decide for themselves whether or not they need rent control and which types of property that rent control would apply to.
So what do the opponents say?
Opponents say that rent control is complicated and leads to unintended consequences. The Legislative Analyst's Office, a nonpartisan government agency, says this initiative could lower the property values on homes. They say that Prop 33 is a Trojan horse that overturns state housing laws, as well as has no protections for renters. This ballot language was challenged by the Yes for Prop 33 campaign, but was affirmed in court. They also say that capping rents for more properties, including ones built after 1995, is essentially a signal to developers to build less, not more, housing units that the state critically needs.
Can you tell us about campaign financing, please?
Sure. As of August 21st, 17 million has been contributed in support and 40 million has been contributed against Prop 33. You can see the top contributors on your screen.
And let's close with what a yes vote and what a no vote would mean.
A yes vote means that state law would not limit the kinds of rent control laws cities and counties could have. And a no vote means that state law would continue to limit the kinds of rent control laws cities and counties could have.
Thank you, Regina.
You're welcome, Mary.
There is now $31.6 million in support, which is up from 17 million. So from 17 to 31.6. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation has increased their contributions to $30 million. And there is now $56 million in opposition, up from $40 million. The California Apartment Association has increased their contribution to $34.5 million in opposition.
Okay, that one's a confusing one. Any questions? Yes. Yeah.
Can you repeat the yes, no? That went too fast.
Yes, sure. So the yes means that we will no longer have the restrictions on rent control that are currently in effect. No means that we will be able to put rent control on anything we want.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
And a follow-up on that, there was a list of what those current rent control restrictions are from the Costa-Hawkins.
Yes.
And there's like 3 of them.
Yeah.
One was
they can't be on single-family homes or condominiums. They can't be on houses that have been built after 1995. And the third one is, I don't remember. But basically, it's restricting rent control on things that are those 3 things. So I have it written down here. So if we have more questions, I will answer those, and then I'll look it up while we're looking at the next. But those 3 things are important. Yes.
It's not a question, but it's a comment. I sit here all night and I listen to property taxes, property tax, and property tax. And then they want to put rent control on. So how do you pay for your property when, you know, all you're hearing about is all these bonds and everything creating more and more and more property taxes? So, you know, it's kind of a bad deal.
So the rent control now is on 1/4 of the housing in California because of the limits that are on what can be rent controlled. So the if we take off the limits that are on rent control, then rent control can be put on by different cities, towns, and districts. They could put rent control on more properties. So that would then limit the amount of rent that people could have. So that would impact property tax, you're right, because they would not be paying, the landlord would still have to pay property tax, but they would not be getting the rent from the person. The rent control would limit the amount of rent they take in. So you're right, that's part of the dilemma of why this is a big confusing thing. Yeah. Anybody else? No. Oh, yes. There is rent control in the mobile unit, the Marin Valley Mobile Community. Go ahead, tell us what it is.
It's a senior mobile home park in Novato. Actually, all mobile home parks in Novato are subject to the Novato rent control ordinance, which is only for mobile home parks. But there are 3 ballot measures in different cities right now in Marin. I think Larkspur, Fairfax, and I don't know, San Anselmo. So there are 3 rent control measures in different cities that are going to be on this ballot.
Local
Question.
measures. Yeah.
So it won't change anything unless the cities provide opportunities for the voters to vote on the rent control, any new rent control.
If this
If it passes.
yes, because right now the restrictions are intact.
Everywhere.
But if this passes, then the cities have to enact their own laws. And the state can't act on this anymore. They block that for the future.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'll look that other thing up as we are looking at 34.
Hi, I'm Megan Stone, and this is Donna Roper, and this is California State Proposition 34. You'll see it on your ballot as restricts spending of prescription drug revenues by certain healthcare providers. It's an initiative statute. Donna, can you please tell us the question Prop 34 puts to the voters?
Sure, Megan. Prop 34 poses the question, should certain healthcare providers be required to spend 98% of revenues generated from the federal discount prescription drug programs on direct patient care?
And what's the background on this prop? Can you give us the current situation?
Medi-Cal is a federal state program that provides health coverage and pays for prescription drug costs for low-income people. The federal drug discount program provides discounts on drugs to healthcare providers like a Kaiser Permanente who meet certain rules.
And who receives federal drug discounts?
Eligible providers are public or private nonprofits that focus on serving low-income people, and state law prohibits providers from charging Medi-Cal more than the discounted price of the drug.
Is there any oversight on these discounts?
There's currently no requirement or oversight on how revenues earned from the federal discount prescription drug programs are spent.
What does Prop 34 propose?
Prop 34 creates new rules about how certain healthcare entities spend revenue from a federal drug discount program. Specifically, the entities would have to spend at least 98% of their net revenues earned in California on healthcare services provided directly to patients or direct patient care.
Would this requirement apply to all healthcare entities?
No, healthcare entities must meet the following criteria. The entity participates in a federal drug discount program. The entity has or has ever had a license in California to operate as a health plan, pharmacy, or clinic, or has had certain contracts with Medi-Cal or Medicare. The entity has a 10-year period where it spent more than $100 million on purposes other than direct patient care discount programs. And the entity owns and operates or has previously owned and operated multifamily housing units with at least 500 violations with a severity level of high.
Is there any oversight in Prop 34?
Prop 34 requires affected entities to report their revenue and expenses annually to the state. The state can charge affected entities fees to cover any enforcement and penalty costs and operating restrictions.
What would be the fiscal impact of Prop 34?
Prop 34 would increase state costs, likely in the millions of dollars annually, to enforce new rules on certain healthcare entities. Affected entities would pay fees to cover these costs.
What are supporters saying?
Supporters say this is a simple case of accountability. When the federal government gives discounts to healthcare providers, taxpayers deserve to know that the money is being used to help the neediest patients. They also say this proposition would provide much needed transparency and rein in abuse.
And what are opponents saying?
Opponents say that Prop 34 is an attempt by the California Apartment Association to harm a specific healthcare provider, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, that supports rent control. They also say that Prop 34 weaponizes the initiative process, so no organization in the future will be safe from retribution.
What about campaign financing?
So far, $18.5 million has been contributed in support, and $532,000 has been contributed in opposition. See the top donors on your screen.
All right, wrapping up. What does a yes vote and a no vote mean on Prop 34?
A yes vote means that certain healthcare providers would be required to spend 98% of revenues generated from federal discount prescription drug programs on direct patient care. And a no vote means these new requirements would not go into effect.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna.
You're welcome, Megan.
Contributions in support are now $28.6 million, with the California Apartment Association Issues Committee increasing their contribution to $29.5 million. In opposition, the total is $1.15 million. The AIDS Healthcare Association has increased their contribution in opposition to $1.15 million.
Okay, another confusing one.
So I just want to make sure I understand. So is providing housing not considered direct patient care?
Yes.
That's the gist of the.
So the federal discount drug program discounts go into a fund that the pharmacy, the company that receives them, can use for their purposes. And their purposes are sometimes not direct patient care as a priority. For instance, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which is a health organization that gets discounts on drugs when they buy the drugs. They then use that money for patient care, but they also use that money to support their anti-rent control mission. They want to get rid of rent control because they own some properties. So it's tied up. Again, this was put on the ballot by petition, and the apartment association wants rent control, so they're trying to stop the entity from taking over and spending their money on things other than patient care, and they feel that doing this allows them the opportunity to do well for the people who need the money, 98% of the people who need direct patient care.
So because I mean, the part about the violations, that seems very specific.
Yeah, very specific, and it is really designed for one specific organization, which is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, because they have used their money to support housing projects that have not been maintained in a sufficient fashion. So that is why that comes up, and the way they're wording it is that anybody who does this will have to be penalized as well and pay the fees and move their money into direct patient care. But really, the target is the American Apartment Association doesn't want the AIDS Healthcare Foundation to be doing this anymore. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation has supported this Prop 33 that's on the ballot to get rid of rent control. In the last 2 elections, they've also supported trying to get rid of rent control. And the Apartment Association is trying to stop them from doing that. Yeah. Well, the Apartment Association wants to be able to not have rent control because they want to be able to get the higher rents. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? It's confusing. Yeah.
So
they're just a huge lobbying group in the state of California.
Yeah.
And
But they're a pharmacy or, they're a health entity. They do support the AIDS, community, and they do get, the reason that they have the discount drugs is because they buy drugs for the AIDS community. They supply AIDS patients with these drugs. Now, the AIDS patients buy the drugs for a slightly higher amount that they get them for, so they are getting that discount money, put it in their pocket, and then they spend it for these other things.
Right, but the apartment association is a huge lobbying.
Yeah.
So it's these two huge lobbying
that are paying
that are
petitions.
fighting it out with
Yeah.
voters and initiatives.
Yeah.
This just seems wrong on so many levels.
Yep. So write your congressman, write your senators.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems like a massive abuse of the initiative process to fight with something that shouldn't be
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. We have two more, so let's get through them because Lisa, who's sitting there so patiently, has some wonderful things to tell you. So let's do 35.
Hi, I'm Carol Joy Harris, and this is Diane Rogers. This is California State Proposition 35. It's an initiative statute. You'll see it on your ballot as provides permanent funding for Medi-Cal healthcare services. Diane, can you tell us what question Proposition 35 poses?
Sure. Prop 35 asks voters, should California make permanent the existing tax on managed care organization health plans and require this tax to be used only to fund Medi-Cal healthcare services?
Thank you. And what is the current situation behind Prop 35?
The managed care organization tax is a per month, per person tax imposed on managed care insurance companies like Kaiser Permanente that the state created and authorizes to pay for Medi-Cal healthcare services. Medi-Cal is the state and federal healthcare insurance program for low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities in California.
Is the managed care organization tax new?
No, the managed care organization tax has been in place since 2009. It's approved every few years by the legislature and federal government. It was last approved in 2023 and will expire at the end of 2026.
And how is the revenue collected by this fund handled?
Currently, this tax revenue is put into the general fund, and lawmakers use it to pay for existing costs in the Medi-Cal program and increase funding for Medi-Cal and other health programs. For instance, the state uses this money to increase Medi-Cal payments to doctors. It is estimated to raise between $7 billion and $8 billion annually.
So what does Prop 35 propose?
Proposition 35 proposes to permanently establish the per month, per person tax on managed care organizations starting in 2027, subject to federal approval. In 2025 and 2026, Prop 35 will impose new rules regarding which Medi-Cal services receive funding from the tax.
Are there rules regarding how the tax revenue collected can be used?
Yes, it requires the state to use tax revenues solely for specified Medi-Cal services. Plus, it prohibits revenues from being used to replace other existing Medi-Cal funding and caps administrative expenses. It requires independent audits of programs receiving funding.
So what would the fiscal effect be of Prop 35?
In the next few years, there will be no changes to state tax revenue. In 2025 and 2026, there would be increased state costs between $1 billion and $2 billion. In 2027 and thereafter, Prop 35's permanent tax on health plans will create new rules about how the money is spent. After the temporary tax ends, the long-term fiscal impact is uncertain due to various rules in the California Constitution that impact the state budget.
And what do supporters say about Prop 35?
Supporters say Prop 35 will improve access to healthcare, reduce emergency wait times, make prescription drugs more affordable, and expand our healthcare workforce. They say this initiative represents the most important investment in California's healthcare in our state's history and will increase access to care well into the future.
And what do the opponents say?
Opponents say restricting how the tax revenue is spent hamstrings future legislators and the governor's ability to balance the state budget. No official opposition group has filed to date.
What is Prop 35's campaign financing?
$33.6 million has been contributed in support. See the top contributors on your screen. And no dollars have been contributed in opposition to date.
So in summary, what does a yes vote mean and a no vote mean?
A yes vote supports permanently authorizing a tax on managed care organizations requiring revenues to be used for increased Medi-Cal programs. A no vote opposes extending the tax on managed care organizations, allowing it to expire in 2026.
Okay, well, thank you, Diane.
You're welcome, Carol Joy.
$48.4 million has been contributed. The California Association of Hospitals and Health Systems has increased their donation to $15 million. Global Medical Response has contributed $13 million, and the California Medical Association has increased their contribution to $10 million. There are still no contributions in opposition.
Okay, yeah.
What is a managed care organization?
Managed care organization is something like Kaiser Permanente, Provident Healthcare, Sutter. Yeah. So they're paying the tax. They are taxed.
So are the individuals who are part of those programs taxed, or is it the organization?
The organization itself. Yeah, the organization itself.
Has the legislature ever considered a bill to make this permanent through the legislative process? And because now it's being put as an initiative, which to me, because if the legislature has been since 2009 re-upping this provision every couple of years, for some reason they've chosen not to make it permanent, which I assume they could vote to do, but that now this is going on as a ballot initiative to make it permanent instead. Yeah. Do you know anything about what the legislative conversation has been?
No, all I know is that if this doesn't pass, the legislature and the federal government could renew it again. So it's not like it would go away forever, but there's no guarantees. And I think it depends on what the legislature is thinking, because if this goes into effect, they can't move money around in the general fund anymore. This money has to go to this particular resource. Yes.
So did you say that the managed care businesses are like Kaiser or Sutter, so they in turn can pass that on to their patients, if you will?
They can, but this tax has been in effect since 2009, so chances are it's not going to change much in the future.
Okay. And all of this information is really good information, trying to keep up with it. Are you guys going to have this available on your website?
Yeah, so on our YouTube channel, all these videos are posted, so you can look at them all together or separately. So if you say, oh, I don't understand 34 at all, you can go and watch that one only.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anybody else? Questions? Okay, 36, this is the last one. You made it.
Hi, I'm Caroline Silverstein.
And I'm Becky Bingay.
And this is California State Proposition 36. You'll see it on your ballot as allows felony charges and increases sentences for certain drug and theft crimes. It is an initiative statute. Becky, what question does Prop 36 ask of the voters?
The voters are asked, should there be changes to felony laws and an increase in sentencing for certain drug and theft charges?
What is the current situation?
Currently, people convicted of a felony can be sentenced to county jail or state prison, depending on the crime and their criminal history. People convicted of a misdemeanor can be sentenced to county community supervision, county jail, and are given a fine. In 2014, a law was passed reducing some theft and drug crimes from felonies to misdemeanors.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, shoplifting items worth less than $950 and drug possession became misdemeanors. If these are nonviolent crimes, the people convicted of these crimes serve time in county jail or receive probation rather than serving time in prison.
So what does Prop 36 propose?
Proposition 36 would change punishments for some drug and theft crimes in 3 ways. First, it would change some misdemeanors to felonies and increase those sentences. For example, theft of items worth $950 or less would become a felony if the person has 2 or more related past convictions. Enhanced penalties could be imposed if an offender steals, damages, or destroys property by acting together with 2 or more other offenders or by causing losses of $50,000 or more. The value of the property stolen in multiple thefts could be aggravated so that a felony can be charged.
What other changes are proposed?
Second, sentencing for fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamine possession could be lengthened and would earn felony sentences to be served in state prison and not in county jail. People convicted of possession of these drugs with 2 or more past convictions for related drug crimes could be charged with a treatment mandated felony.
What is a treatment mandated felony?
Offenders would receive mental health or drug treatment and be offered shelter, job training, and other services. If treatment is successfully completed, the charges would be expunged and there would be no jail time. If refused or failed, the offender would get up to 3 years in state prison.
You mentioned Prop 36 would change things 3 ways.
Yes, third, it would require warnings to convicted hard drug dealers and manufacturers that they could be charged with murder if they continue to traffic in hard drugs and someone dies as a result.
What would be the fiscal impact?
Increased criminal justice system costs could potentially be in the low hundreds of millions of dollars annually, primarily due to an increase in state prison population. Increased local criminal justice costs potentially in the tens of millions of dollars annually due to court-related county jail, community supervision, and court-mandated health and drug-related workload.
What are the supporters saying?
Supporters are saying this bill would reduce much-needed accountability for repeat offenders. And there's a need to discard the pieces of the 2014 law that are making it harder for public safety officials to keep our communities safe.
And what are opponents saying?
So opponents say this ballot measure would cost billions of dollars by increasing the prison population during a time when California is already dealing with budget deficits. And this is a huge step backward that will do nothing to make our communities safer, line the pockets of for-profit prison corporations, and take funds away from successful rehabilitation and recidivism programs.
Can you tell us about campaign financing?
Sure, $9.9 million has been contributed in support, and $1.3 million has been contributed in opposition. See the top contributors on your screen.
In conclusion, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote would approve changing certain drug and theft charges to felony laws and increasing sentencing. A no vote would oppose changing certain drug and theft charges to felony laws and increase sentencing.
Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome, Caroline.
Support are up to 11.5 million from 9.9 million. The top contributors are the same as before. $1.7 million has been contributed in opposition, up from 1.3 million. The SEIU California State Council for Working People joined the top contributors with a $250,000 donation.
Okay, so Prop 36, yes. Oh.
That SEIU stands for Service Employees International Union, or Service Employees, pardon me? Oh, they are SEIU, California State Council for Working People, so it's a union. Join the top contributors with a $250,000 donation. That is in opposition, thank you.
So anybody have any questions on 36? It's a lot of info packed into that one video. I did want to get back to the Costa-Hawkins Rent Control Act and let you know that the three things that are currently limiting rent control, they cannot apply to single-family homes, condominiums, and housing occupied after February 1st, 1995. So I had it right. We just had condominiums and houses as one instead of two. So that wraps our portion of the event tonight, and we really appreciate your time and attention, especially since we are, volunteers. We appreciate that very much. I want to thank my co-host here, Carol Joy. I want to thank Pat for putting us together with this wonderful organization. Ja'Cory in the back room, man, he deserves a big round of applause, I think. And a very, very big thank you to Reverend Leggett and Felicity for bringing us here. God, I wrote it down wrong. That's the problem. I'm so sorry. Felicia. God. Okay. Felicia, will you please stand up and take a bow, please? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You can call me Sam or Joe or something for the rest of our acquaintances.
I also want to thank Lynn Tooley. It's amazing. She does all of this, manages the volunteers, the recordings, the presentations. She's giving many, many presentations to many groups. So God bless her.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. This is a hard act to follow. I really want to thank the League for doing this. I've come to these before and found them exceptionally helpful. I think you probably have too. My name is Lisa Bennett. I'm the president of the Sausalito Marin City School Board, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about Measure G, which is a parcel tax, which we are putting on the ballot this November. And I want to be just as thoughtful and meticulous as the League, so please forgive me if I read from my notes. I want to make sure I'm providing the right information to you. Measure G will allow our small school district the ability to attract and retain high-quality teachers and educational staff. Money raised by Measure G will stay in our community. 2, provide educational opportunities and programs that students need to achieve in high school and college, maintain manageable class sizes, provide additional programs in reading and math, provide instructional materials, provide academic intervention for children who need additional support. Those are the parameters of this tax. That's what it will be used for. When the board passes its budget each year, the board will decide the allocation of this parcel tax to those specific needs. Measure G will support quality educational programs for children pre-K through 8th grade in our district, which are critical years for children to acquire the basics. This tax is as fair as possible. I will break from script for a second and say, since I've been on this board, we've had 2 rounds of budget cuts. It has never been easy. And the last round, we were looking at ways to provide raises to our teachers. And in doing so, we looked at all of the other school districts across the county. Every single one had a parcel tax but ours. And I want to say that is something that really struck us as, well, no wonder we have no money for the teachers, because we really want to retain and attract, again, high-quality teachers. This is essential to the success of our school. And I want to say one other thing off script, which is in these budget cut conversations, I've always insisted that we never forget that we want to become a world-class school. And I'm certain that this parcel tax will help us do that. I want to talk about the limits of this parcel tax. It would be the first parcel tax in the county that is based on square footage. It's not a flat tax. It's 15 cents per square foot. of assessed property. There are some exceptions. For example, public housing here will not be assessed this tax. The houseboats will not be assessed this tax. The voters in all of these places in these communities can vote, but some will, not all will pay this tax. There is a limit on the maximum amount of footage taxed, which is 23,000 square feet. And there's also, for undeveloped parcels, it's only $25. This tax does not increase every year, and it sunsets in 8 years. For example, an annual cost to a property owner for a 1,000 square foot home would be $150. The annual cost for a 2,500 square foot home would be $375, and that would not increase during the term of this tax. There are exceptions for this tax as well. So renters, we can't tell you exactly what your landlord will pass through to you, but this is not automatically assessed to a renter. Low-income homeowners, ages 65 and older, may qualify for a tax exemption subject to a one-time verification. Low-income disabled people, which is property owners receiving Social Security income for a disability or Social Security disability income benefits, may qualify for a tax exemption subject to a one-time verification. And as I said earlier, this tax does expire in 8 years. We are expecting and calculating roughly this will bring in $1.3 million to our district each year, which would be life-changing, I think, for the school board. It would mean, to me, what this means is we could be more proactive and not reactive when looking at our budgets. We can have the time to think through what we want to prioritize versus constantly reacting. There is no formal opposition to this tax. And actually, there is support from the Marin Democratic Party, as well as COST. The local taxpayer authority has supported and endorses this tax. And I actually have a quote I'd like to read to you from COST. Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers, CST, urges voters in the Sausalito Marin City School District to support Measure G. The cost is modest and the need is real. Unlike other parcel taxes that are the same for everyone, this measure is 15 cents per square foot of improved property. That means those who live in mansions pay more than those who live in condos or small homes. In addition, Measure G has a low-income senior exception and sunsets after 8 years. And that's the story of Measure G. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am. They are taxed in a way that does not allow any additional taxes added to their parcels. So they do pay a tax, but there can be no more on top of it.
Congratulations on getting costs support.
It's a big deal. Mm-hmm.
When you say square footage, were you talking about the structure or the lot size?
It would be on the improved parcel, so whatever, it would be on the structure.
Okay.
On the structure, not on the lot size. Okay. And if there's a lot that has nothing on it, it's $25.
What if you own half the hillside up here? Then what do you pay?
If there's no improvements on the property, it'd be a flat $25.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That was easy. Great. I'm happy to, I have a question for an audience member. Nixon, is there a addition to our web page for the district yet? On the. Okay, thank you. So if you'd like to know more, we're going to post only the facts. The district cannot take a position technically, although it, currently would, I would say I am personally in support of this tax. And the board voted unanimously to pass this resolution to put the measure on the ballot. And we will have more information on our school district website. Great. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. I second that.
I'm going to take an opportunity to just tell everyone to use Vote 411, which is a website that you can go to, unbiased, and we have little bookmarks if you want to remember or pass around to your family members. You go on the website, you type in your address, your ballot comes up, and from that location you can click all the links, look at who's giving the money, kind of what we did here tonight, but you'll be able to see all that information, also candidates, and anything that you will be voting on. Yeah.
Thank you to everyone, and thank you to the league. And